Hello, thank you everyone for joining. Today is a recorded session. Mainly we are recording a few sessions because during these next few weeks we'll be traveling, so we still would like to keep on streaming a podcast ideally every Thursday. So today I'll be talking with a bug bounty hunter, a security professional. We found quite a lot of vulnerabilities in WordPress plugins and similar software, and we will mainly focus on RegexXSS, which is like regular expression cross-site scripting. It's a specific vulnerability class, mainly when a cross-site scripting vulnerability is triggered via abusable regular expressions. Most probably I'm butchering it, but I'll let Matt explain this. And in fact, with me today I have Matt Rollings. Hello, Matt. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, as I explained already, yeah, we'll be talking about RegexXSS. But before we jump into the details, to start off with, can you give us a bit of a brief introduction about yourself and what do you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I've had quite a different background. So I originally started in physics, and this was mainly because at school kind of had some bad advice from a teacher that told me like don't go into computing. Computing is just for nerds. And I don't know why me and my parents listened to him, because at the time I was massively a nerd. So, but for some reason or other, just didn't end up doing computing. Ended up going down the physics route. But I did quite enjoy physics, like the problem solving aspect of it. So one of the modules we had at physics was actually called problem solving, and it was all about trying to teach you to think laterally, like really abstract questions, like if you eat a donut, how far can you walk on it, or how many windows are there in the city? So things like that, where you don't have a set answer to find, but you just need to be able to prove that you can go on that journey towards finding the solution. And that's kind of stuck with me my whole life, because I'm really curious. I like figuring out how stuff works. And quite often, like with bug hunting, if you can figure out how it works, you can figure out how you can bypass that or use it against itself, to sort of find more interesting bugs. So I stayed in academia for a while and did physics, and enjoyed. I really enjoyed like making my own experiments and kind of going down the programming route, like making little hardware things to work and doing simulations and stuff. But while I was doing that, Android phones started coming out, and I got really interested because I've always been into Linux and open source. But the Android phone came out, and I was like, I wonder if I can write an application for this. And so I did, and ended up writing a few applications, and one of them started generating me a bit of money. And so that kind of, it motivated me to start like pursuing this more. So I ended up paying for myself to go over to one of the first Google I/Os in America, which was really cool. So I got to meet a load of people, and I ended up just randomly bumping into someone who was living in the same city as me, who was the CTO of like an application development house. And they offered me a job. So I ended up dropping out of uni there and taking the job with them, and had a really good run, learned a lot of stuff. Did a lot of work for Android development there. After a while, that company unfortunately went bust. But I took on the clients, the apps I was working for there, and went into freelance development. So that was a really lucky transition for me to start doing this contracting work, which gave me a lot of money, a lot of time to develop my skills as well. And so that probably continued for a good 10 years or so. And then I transitioned into cybersecurity, because I've always been interested in kind of the hacking side of things. Like, as I said, I've been interested in Linux since I was about 18. But I didn't really realize that you could get paid well for doing cybersecurity or hacking. I thought, that's just something people writing malware or something, or the bad guys can do. But I found the university nearby did a cybersecurity master's, so I applied for that and did that part-time while I was still doing my Android development work. And that went really well. And while I was there, one of the training companies that I was using, called Immersive Labs, which create like practical secure coding labs for developers to use to improve their understanding of these vulnerabilities and be able to write more secure code. And it also does more of the attacker side of things. So you can do these labs as attackers, so you can try and exploit these things as well. And so it's really good to give developers that kind of the hacker mindset. I think you discussed with Francesco before.
Correct.
But yeah, if you can kind of teach developers how to think of like the data as like something that might actually be hostile, and like this is where most bugs come from in my mind, is like the data coming in from a user is trusted, and like you might not necessarily think that comes from a user, but it might have ended up in the database and it comes from the database, but at some point a user has been able to write that and you can end up getting a vulnerability that way. So really teaching developers to kind of think with a hacker mindset so they can catch these bugs. So I joined the AppSec team. I actually joined Immersive Labs because on the student leaderboard there, I'd ended up getting to the top, and they reached out and asked if I'd like to do some contract for them, so write some labs for them. So I started contracting for them, and they offered me a full-time job. And after a couple of years, I was leading the AppSec team, which was really cool. I had a great time doing that. But after a while, I stopped working there and went into fintech for a few months. But that really wasn't for me. Like, it seems a lot of people were a little bit unhappy with their jobs. But you get kind of stuck in the fintech world because you're getting paid so much. It's difficult to leave and find another job without taking a massive pay cut. So I left after around 6 months to kind of explore what I enjoy doing, which is teaching. So I teach kids how to code once a week, which is really, really fulfilling. So it's nice being able to pass that on. And the other thing I really enjoy is bug bounty. So I've probably been only doing bug bounty for around 3 years now, with 2 of those being full time. And it was just because in passing, someone I worked at Immersive Labs mentioned that there are some WordPress bug bounty programs that have started up. And because this is open source and I've got skills doing application security, it might be something I'm interested in. So I started having a look at WordPress plugins, which have kind of been a little bit infamous for how many vulnerabilities you can generally find in them. So it started off quite slow. So I found like one vulnerability, and it took me around a month to properly exploit it. And I thought, if it's all like this, it's going to take so long to make any kind of money from it. But the more and more I learned about WordPress, the easier and easier and easier it got. And because there's so many plugins, I think there's something like around 70,000 plugins, maybe a little bit less. If you can think of a way to write some code, you can pretty much find it. So if you can think, this is how I could write it and accidentally introduce a vulnerability, and then you can find the mutations of that, you can probably find lots of instances of this vulnerability that you're able to exploit.
Interesting. A very, very interesting journey. Thanks for the explanation. In fact, before we jump into the technical details, you mentioned that, usually most vulnerabilities are because developers trust the user input, rather it's going to the database or being reflected into the interface. This is a big problem because it's common. I speak to a lot of developers, even very brilliant developers, nothing bad with them, but many people are not, because you can only specialize in security or development. You cannot specialize kind of almost in both. It's not because they're incapable, but is it mostly because they're not even aware what possible type of attacks there are, so they don't protect for those type of attacks?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of it definitely comes from the not being aware of it. So you can do a lot by increasing the awareness of the developers. This is something we did a lot of when I was training cybersecurity. Like, you try and empower the developers to take that responsibility for security. Because at the end of the day, if you're writing code, it does need to be your responsibility to ensure that code is secure. And I mean, that shouldn't just be one person's job. There should be safety mechanisms inside, so other people reviewing the code that's going in. And it can be difficult as well, because if you're working at a company, you're going to be getting paid effectively to add new features, and you might not be necessarily be given enough time to test everything and spend enough time on the code. So it can definitely be difficult, and you kind of need buy-in from both sides. So you need the developers to want to fix the security issues, but you also need like management to allocate time to letting them do this, and that should include the training as well to make sure they can stay on top of it. And this probably does change a little bit with how AI is getting introduced, because AI can be a powerful tool for both writing the code but also reviewing the code and helping you write more secure code. So if you ask it to look for security vulnerabilities in something you've written, it will do a pretty decent job.
Yes, since you're mentioning AI, I spoke a couple of times to Maciek, someone who works for PitchTech, and he was telling me, because especially with AI, I think even Oliver mentioned this at CloudFest, their CEO, the number of reported vulnerabilities is just going crazy. I think last month they received at least 2,000 reports, and they have to validate them, etc. So it's quite crazy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's gone mad, and like that's having a knock-on effect for like bug bounty hunters, because a lot of people are submitting like genuine ones, but they're getting massively overwhelmed by the amount of AI reports by people who haven't even bothered to install the plugin to check if it is actually exploitable. So this means as a legitimate researcher, my bugs are taking like much longer to get through triage. So I know things are taking like around a month, and I think that's the same at WordFence as well as PatchStack. So it is going, at the moment, it is going to impact the security of the entire landscape as well, because this means vulnerabilities are going to exist for longer before they're disclosed to customers. So it probably will negatively affect the security landscape. But I know that the companies are doing a lot to try and improve these triage speeds by using AI themselves and making it so that unvetted security researchers need to like submit videos or something of proving that they can actually exploit these things, because at the moment they're just spamming them in and they're not actually vulnerable.
Yeah, in fact, I've seen cases where, as you said, people are not even installing the plugins. They just download the repository whenever there's a release, download it again, download the plugin, run a diff, use AI to highlight something, and they just try their luck basically, which is in fact, I've heard someone mentioning as well cases with people using what's it called, OpenClaw, literally just going out on its own, researching and just trying to get results. So yeah, it's going a bit crazy. So yeah, but let's jump back to RegexSS. This is a vulnerability class which you coined, because it's not an actual commonly used name. It includes regex and cross-site scripting. On your blog, it's again, just talk a bit about bug bounties. So far, you got 20,000 from it, $20,000 or pounds.
Yeah, so from this vulnerability class, it's going to be around 20 to 30 now, just because of the number of times I found it. So it's definitely something that is under-researched at the moment. So hopefully more people get into it. I've had one person reach out, and I've collaborated with them, and we found a load more instance of it. So it is definitely an interesting one for other bug bounty hunters to pick up.
Good. So RegexSS is basically a joint regex and XSS. Let's start with regex, which are regular expressions. For those who maybe are new, can you just give us a brief explanation of what regular expressions are?
Yeah, exactly. Let's back it up slightly and just go over what HTML is and what XSS is, and then get into the...
Do you want to demo right away? Want to share your screen?
I'll jump into a demo.
Good. There you go.
Okay, let's move that out the way. Okay, cool. So we're going to go with some super basic HTML just to explain everything. Cool. So this is HTML. So for those unaware, this is just a heading, so H1, These are the different levels. So you can have H1 to H7, I think, different levels. You can have a paragraph with some text in, and this is an image with a source. So if you look, you just see a little, my nice face there. HTML is kind of for the more static parts of the website. So you've kind of got three languages with what happens in the client side of your web browser. So you've got the HTML, which is the static elements generally. You've got the CSS, which we haven't got any here, which is for the theming, so how you make it look pretty. And then you've got the JavaScript. So this is the powerful language that can do a lot of dynamic stuff. So you might have heard about the term AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript, which is how you fetch new data to embed on the page somewhere. So that's just a way of meaning you don't have to keep clicking between different pages and stuff. You can just have stuff appear on one page. And so generally with WordPress and other HTML sites, you need to include some user data. And quite often that would just be plain text and you'd put it on the page. But if the user has the ability to insert tags, like you could have a bold tag in there, that might be perfectly fine for your use case. And that's quite common in WordPress and other HTML sites. But you need to draw the line at what they are allowed to do. So there needs to be like a security boundary. And so we don't really want them executing any JavaScript. So JavaScript, you typically see it inside tags like this, and you see autocomplete's just popping it up. So this is just executing a JavaScript command to write a line to the console log. And if we just use alert, that shows us how we can trigger a little alert box. And this is the most common thing security researchers will do just to prove that they've got a JavaScript executing on the page. So we can also have JavaScript inside attributes, so inside HTML tags. And this is what a lot of cross-site scripting will do. So if I'm able to insert something here, so you can have an on-click event. So this would be when the image is clicked, you just pop an alert saying image clicked. So if we go back to the page, and then if we click it, we get an alert. Okay. And that just means we've been able to execute JavaScript successfully. There's other ones you can do. You can do the same with on load. So that's when the image loads, and you can do on error. And those are the basic few cross-site scripting payloads. So if we can insert that, we can get JavaScript execution. Cool. So that's basic JavaScript execution and XSS. So if now we look at regex.
Just to confirm, the clarification, the JavaScript runs on the client side, correct? It runs.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So this will run in your browser. So this is an attack that's working against a user who's visiting your website. So actually, let's just so we've demonstrated basic JavaScript stuff like doing alerts, but I think it's important to actually discuss what an attacker would do here. So if we just do one that works on load, rather than sending an alert, we could do a window.location, and we can then redirect the user to any site. So this could be a phishing site. So if you go back here, the page instantly loads to Google because we've got JavaScript executing. So that's one way they could do a phishing attack, but what's really more powerful is being able to control everything the user's doing. So if we're logged in as an admin on our WordPress instance, which I think I may already be. Yeah, so see, I'm Howdy admin, so I'm logged in. So that's good. So if we put a payload in here that abuses our admin privileges to create a new user, I'll just show you how that works. So that's quite a long one, so don't expect anyone to read it. But it's basically just popping a payload in. So that's here. And this is creating an iframe to the add user page in WordPress. it's going to automatically fill in attacker as the username, password 123. It's selected the role as administrator. This has failed because I've already just done this to prove the demo. But if we go in here, if we just delete that. Cool. Let me show you again then. Cool. So this iframe, which is embedding the add user page, that could be made completely invisible. So if you're getting exploited by this, you could have no indication that this has actually happened. So that has just created a new admin user called attacker. And then we can log in as attacker with password 123. So it's a really quite a powerful payload against the admin user. And this is a kind of attack you'd see in real life, except obviously you wouldn't see any of this, and you'd be able to take over the whole website from there.
And because the JavaScript is running on your browser, of course, if you are logged in, it's going to read your cookies and be able to send requests in your session.
Yeah, so with modern protections, you can't generally read the cookies, but you can still use them to do stuff. So any action you can take on the website. So this would trigger against other users of the website. It might be a subscriber or just a contributor. So if I got a contributor account, I could make posts, etc. If I'm a subscriber, I could update my own details, etc. But the real target you want to go after is the admin, but you could start by exploiting everyone else to get towards that. Cool. So that's what I wanted to say on cross-site scripting. If we go over to regex now, it kind of looks like someone has fallen asleep on the keyboard. It looks complicated, but it's actually a lot easier than it seems. I put off learning it for so many years because I was a bit intimidated by how it looks. But it's actually such a powerful tool. I don't think there's any days where I don't use regex anymore. So it's massively useful for development. It's common in pretty much every programming language, and WordPress and PHP are no exception. It's very liberally used there. It's used a lot in WordPress core. That's how WPK says sanitizes stuff to try and get rid of any kind of cross-site scripting. So this is a website I like to use just to test regular expressions. So this is just some text that's going in. So imagine this is the text we're trying to match. And so what I like to use for a first example is just a phone number that's in there. So you might use regular expressions to try and match that. So if you use \d, that would match a digit. And then if you want to match more than one of them, you just add a plus. So this will match as many digits as it can in a row. And that's not the best thing because it will match smaller numbers as well. It will match numbers inside other bits of text. So you might want to specify the length, and to do that, you'd add it in curly braces. And then you might want to do between 6 and 9. Well, that one's slightly too long, but there we go. So this will match any continuous string of numbers between 6 and 9. So there's lots of other things you could do. You could match an email address like test@test.com. So there's a lot of, so \w matches any character that's word-like, so alphanumerics and underscore. So if you match that, so that'll match the first part of the email. We look for the @ symbol. Then we look for more characters just for that. And then add the domain. So we're looking for a dot, and dot needs escaping here because that character on its own means match any character. And that's one of the common mistakes that people do, is leaving a dot without escaping it. And that means we could match anything here, and it would still match instead of just the escaped version. So this may go over some people's heads, but it's basically just a way of matching text. And quite often in WordPress and PHP, we either match that text to extract some data from it, or we use preg replace to replace that data with something else. Say you might have an email address here that you want to replace emails or phone numbers with asterisks for privacy or something. You'd be able to do that with preg replace, or you could remove them entirely from the output. And so these are the very valid uses for regular expressions. There's obviously thousands more cases where you'd want to do things like this.
Yeah, for example, in real life websites, contact form, you match that you get an email address when you ask for an email address, telephone number, you ask for a telephone number, and stuff like correct.
Yeah, any kind of placeholders. You can use it for sanitization and stuff as well. So absolutely loads of uses. It's massively useful. But one of the things is, because developers know how to use regular expressions, once you've learned that, you kind of start using it all the time. So you know the saying of when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The same thing is true of regex. So we're always trying to solve things in the way we understand it. And so that translates to people using regex in places it shouldn't. One of these places is in HTML, because HTML can be quite flexible, whereas regex is quite strict. And you can easily get quite complicated once you start trying to catch all these little rules that you're trying to account for. And regex can never be context aware, so it can never understand, oh, this is HTML. It just treats everything as if it's a string. And this is what the crux of the problem is for the vulnerability type I'm calling RegexSS. It's because it doesn't have this contextual awareness. You can kind of abuse it. So if we chuck some HTML into here, so we're no longer matching email addresses. Let's say we want to grab the link from a page. So the contents of the href here. That's going to be our link to either a relative or an absolute website. So what we could do, there's always lots of different ways to write in regex, but what we could do is this. So we're going to look for the href and the quotes around it. We're going to allow any characters, and star means 0 to infinite amount of characters in between. And you can see that immediately that's matched this, but it's also ended at the last quote. So we add a little question mark in to make it non-greedy. So that will just match the smallest example we want possible. There's also groups that you can add in. So if we're interested in capturing only this, so only the link part, we can put brackets around it, and this would be our first matching group. So if you go on details, you can see this is our first match. The whole thing is this, but the group one that we've matched is just /example. So this is like a very basic example, but once you move on to the RegexSS stuff, you'll see how this is kind of the basis for all the vulnerabilities I've found. So learning regex has kind of been a superpower as a bug bounty hunter, because I've been looking for vulnerabilities that use regex in a way that can be abused. But to find these vulnerabilities, I've also been using regex to find them, because I can download the source code for all of the WordPress plugins and search all of them in quite a short space of time to find code that might be vulnerable to this. So it's kind of been like a superpower for me learning regex.
So you're using it to find the issues which are using them being abused, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's regex all the way down.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons people use regex is because it's quite fast. It's not as fast as just a normal string replace, but it is a lot faster than any of the alternatives. And the alternatives for regex with HTML is parsing it. So there's like DOM document or WP tag processor, I think it is. So there's built-in ways in PHP and in WordPress that are more secure because they understand the HTML context. So these are the ways to kind of avoid these vulnerabilities. But with that comes that complexity of having to learn how to use that extra class. So it's well worth learning if you want to avoid this vulnerability class entirely. But let's dive into RegexXSS. So it's quite common in WordPress, but it's not only limited to WordPress. The principle applies to other frameworks and languages as well. And so the principle is that WordPress performs this protection mechanism for you by sanitizing data that comes from a user, and they protect against most default cross-site scripting attacks using their built-in regex checks, which are pretty solid. I don't think anyone's found any bypasses in them for quite a while. So they're quite reliable. But this vulnerability type arises from developers performing a regular expression after these checks have occurred. So you have this HTML that's been pre-sanitized by WordPress, and then you're modifying it in a way. And it's this modification that can be abused by an attacker. So I think this is also called mutation-based cross-site scripting. So this is a really interesting one. And let's have a look at it just in this regular expression tool. So if we paste in something where we're looking for an attribute and we match. So it's the same as this example before, but we're looking for attribute here. Cool. So this is matching attribute here. And we might have a preg replace that's just deleting that. So once it runs, it like this is HTML that's perfectly benign, looks good, and it will just delete this from it, and there's nothing bad happening there. But we can write something as an attacker where we can abuse that deletion that would manage to give us that cross-site scripting vulnerability. So I'll just copy in what I've got here. So this is how it will work. So it just deletes that, as I said for the one before, just deletes it, nothing vulnerable. But if we shift the starting point to inside here, so if we wrote attribute equals, now that match is happening here, inside, like in the middle of an attribute, and then that delete is going to do that. And that on its own, that isn't vulnerable either. But because we can start messing with it, we can actually get a vulnerability to occur here. So with a href, you can actually have a JavaScript payload. So this will do the same alert again. So when this gets deleted, it will pop that over there, and we'll get a JavaScript alert. So this is another way of getting cross-site scripting. So this means when this link is clicked, it will do JavaScript alert, and that's just using a pseudo protocol. So this is just, instead of like HTTPS, it would be JavaScript. Cool. So that's the basic one, but we can get more interesting payloads. So if we have a look at this one, this is starting inside a different attribute. It's going to delete. Oh, that's the same one. Sorry. This is what I meant. Nope, sorry.
That's fine.
Right.
Take it.
Yeah, sorry. We'll just write it out. So what we can do is we can change the quotes around it, because single and double quotes are interchangeable in WordPress, in all HTML, sorry. So we can match here, and this will now take us into here. And this is interesting because now we're matching across two attributes, but we can write anything in here. And if you see how it will delete at the moment, it will delete this and leave us with a single and a double quote, which is invalid HTML. But if we put a single quote in here and start writing stuff in here, so this is a standard, the start of a standard payload for me. When that gets deleted, the href becomes empty, and we've got this new attribute that's been promoted from just being inside the value, and now that's going to take, that's going to become an attribute when the HTML is rendered. So we can keep writing stuff in here. Autofocus equals 1, on focus equals alert. And so this you probably need to put that in quotes, but this is my kind of go-to cross-site scripting payload. So the onFocus event is just when something gets focused. So you might press tab a few times and select it. So you can press enter rather than clicking on it. So this is the JavaScript event that will be fired when something is focused. But you can force that element to be focused by adding these two attributes in. So this is a very common one that I use. It's a little bit annoying because the element will continually try and keep focus, which we'll see it in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you now the first vulnerability of this type that I found, which I disclosed to WP Scan some time ago now. I think it was late last year. Cool. So if we look at plugins, the schema and structured data for WordPress and AMP. So we activate it. Let me just show you the code for this before we get started. So if we go into plugins, so this is the schema and structured data. I'm going to quickly search for it because I know what I'm looking for. Now, hopefully that's readable to everyone. Go a little bit bigger.
Yes.
But what we can see is this plugin is designed to modify, replace certain things in the output HTML to make it more structured. And one of the things we see is that they're doing a lot of these preg replace and replacing them with empty string. So almost all of these could be used to perform this attack. I think I just picked one of these item prop ones. So if we go back to regex site, you can see it's very similar to what we have with the attribute, but it's just using item prop instead. So it's slightly different if we use item prop there, and it'll still match across in the same way. So whenever I'm coming up with payloads to this, I just always put them in here because it's easy to visually see what you're doing. So yeah, this code would just delete that item prop, and it happens after WordPress has sanitized the HTML already with the user data in. And so this is why the vulnerability can occur. And this occurs on every page, which is useful for us as an attacker because WordPress by default, you can add comments to most pages. So if we go over, so we'll go over into a new incognito window so we can just browse the website as a non-logged in user. So if we just search for post, we can find some posts using the built-in search page. If we go to author post, we can see I've got an empty post I'm not using for anything yet. And what we can do is we can insert a comment with this malicious item prop inside. So this is the actual payload that I put in the report. So we can put that in. We put the basic mandatory information in. We submit the comment. Cool. And if we load that page again, we won't see anything because that comment needs to be approved first. If you've got something that auto approves, this would trigger straight away. But so we can go in as our admin, click comments, and we see this is a totally normal comment. Looks like a website. Nothing too spammy about it. So an author would probably approve it. Obviously, you could make this more convincing that it looked legitimate and stuff, having a realistic looking link. But once it's approved, if we go back to the page, you'll see that we get this JavaScript alert. And so this could be replaced with one of the more malicious payloads I showed earlier. And you'll just see here that this keeps triggering because of that onFocus event that keeps firing. And what you'll see as well is when I, as the administrator, go to this page, the same thing happens. So now the administrator could be compromised and take over the entire WordPress site.
So basically that means that the code that you posted in the comment, once the administrator sees the comment or that page loads with the comment, it's execute that JavaScript, and the view had, as you said, a script that uses the cookie to create a new user. There you go. It's been executed, and yeah, the vulnerability is successful. Yeah,
exactly. So they can completely compromise your site. And one of the interesting things is this is the first one I found, and I found quite a lot more now. And I think that's totaling around, it would affect around 3 million websites in total, if you count all the installs between the different plugins. So it is quite impactful, especially because it's an unauthenticated attack. Like, it doesn't, like, anyone who can post a comment can execute this. And some of the more interesting ones that we've found are, there are some that when you go to this comment moderation page, they trigger on here as well. So the admin wouldn't even need to approve the comment before they trigger. They would just load this page. They would instantly get exploited. As an attacker, I could make them click the approve button, so my comment went live as soon as they viewed this page. So really impactful stuff.
Yeah. So basically, as you've just shown, if you have, it just highlights how important it is to keep your plugins up to date. If you have this version of the plugin, for example, which is not up to date, someone posts a comment to exploit this, even if they're not registered or anything, you as an administrator, you go there, check the comment. Oh, let me see this. Try to read it, and there you go. It works. Someone managed to exploit that vulnerability without having to log in or stuff like that, because you are running an old version, vulnerable version of this plugin, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of difficult as well, because this is quite a common thing to see in WordPress plugins, not just like with RegexSS, but XSS payloads in general and vulnerabilities in general in WordPress. They're discovered quite often, so you're not necessarily secure just because you have the latest version, because these vulnerabilities are constantly being found. But the two companies that run the bigger WordPress bug bounty programs both have WordPress security plugins, and they offer like virtual patching and like virtual firewalls that will defend against these kind of attacks. But they'll also, because they're doing a more general defense, they'll also defend against attacks that they're not aware about, just by blocking things that look like common kind of payloads. And those are quite successful. I've done a little bit of digging into them. I've not found ways that they can easily be bypassed. So it's definitely worth using one of the security plugins if you can.
Interesting. It's funny because cross-site scripting, I'm not a security expert, but I have basic security background and I've worked with security companies. Cross-site scripting is the most common and easiest to exploit to write vulnerability, and it's very often, I wouldn't say looked down upon, but it's just a cross-site scripting. There's nothing about it, you know. So and as you can show, as you've shown here, it can be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to dismiss it as like, because we always demonstrate it with just a little pop-up, like, if you're unaware as a developer, you're like, I don't care if they make a pop-up happen. But it's demonstrating that impact in a way that developers can understand that really makes it important. Because if you can get XSS on a website, you can do anything that user can do on that website effectively.
Yeah, and I think the problem is because if you demonstrate an SQL injection, you can actually demonstrate and exploit it in a POC, proof of concept. You are actually extracting data from the database. So say, oh, it's. I think it has a bigger impact visually. Like, whoa, they can see data from the database. While as you're saying, XSS, oh, it's just a pop-up. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's you do need that user interaction, but if you exploit the administrator, you could argue it's more impactful than the SQLi. Because the SQLi in WordPress, you might be able to extract certain things from the database, but the passwords are encrypted. You're going to be able to get some data out, but it's not going to be as impactful if you take when you take over the entire website. Because if you get that administrator, you can also leak all of the data, but you can leak the data and more, because you can add a new admin user. You can add a new PHP file if the plugin editor or the theme editor are enabled. You can install extra plugins. And so I think one of the methods you could probably use as an attacker, if you didn't have that ability to write files, like either through the plugin editor or the appearance editor might be disabled, you could install a plugin that you know is vulnerable, like a low install count that might not have been detected. So you install that, you could get a remote code execution right on that and just take over the entire server.
Interesting. So when developers are dealing with HTML manipulation, as you said, like across WordPress is already kind of sanitizing the user input and stuff, but there are some cases where you still might need to manipulate the data or the HTML. What should developers absolutely avoid, or what are the best practices when it comes to HTML manipulation?
Yeah, so I think there's like three main ways of dealing with it. The first one is rejecting input you don't like. You don't tend to see this so much, but it's perfectly valid to do it. And you can use regex to do that. You can say only allow these certain characters. Because for cross-site scripting, there's basically four things you want to stop. You want to stop less than, greater than for the tags to appear, and you want to stop single and double quotes. There are other things, but those four would stop a majority of cross-site scripting attacks. But what I would usually tell developers is figure out what the minimum you can accept. So that might be alphanumeric, maybe some extended ASCII if you're supporting international. But a lot of special characters shouldn't be needed. And there's a lot of places like in WordPress itself where it seems strange to me that that's allowed. Like in the first and last names, you field in WordPress, you can have any character apart from the less than and greater than symbols. So that means one of the first vulnerabilities on mass I discovered was where you could get a cross-site scripting by having a subscriber with a double quote in their name, and you're able to inject additional attributes when someone viewed your profile. So I managed to find that, I think, in about 50 different themes, including some with like over a million installs. So that was quite a good first find. So yeah, there's then sanitization, which is where you remove characters you don't like from the string. This is probably the most common one. You see WordPress getting rid of HTML that it doesn't allow in certain contexts from your data. This is good, but it does mean that the data you put in isn't the data you're getting out. So that might not be suitable for every situation. And then there's encoding. So encoding is changing the characters, like so a less than symbol might be encoded in HTML as like ampersand LT semicolon. So there's a few different ways of encoding something, but then obviously when you render the front end, you need to make sure that that's rendering in a way that looks right to your users. And this is a common mistake as well. So there's a lot of ways to combat cross-site scripting. There's also more advanced ways, but with WordPress, it's kind of difficult because you're relying on their framework. So you generally can't have a content security policy, which is a way of a website blocking certain types of JavaScript and other attacks from occurring by saying this is the subset of things that I'm allowing on the page to execute. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. Generally, it comes down to making sure you don't trust the data that's coming into your bit of code. So always be paranoid of data sources. Always sanitize or encode it or reject it if you think that's invalid data for your use case. Yeah.
Interesting. You said you cannot use content security policy in WordPress. You mean as a plugin developer, right? Because as a website owner, you can always configure CSP and say, okay, all the images are coming from here, all the scripts are coming from the subdomain, right? Because you're talking more from the developer point of view, right?
Yeah, so you can definitely enable it on, like if you've got a server, you can enable it on your server. There's almost certainly CSP plugins for WordPress. The difficulty comes from making sure all the plugins that you've got installed would still work, because you might end up blocking them by accident, and then certain parts of your website stop working. So it's quite a difficult one. It would be good if WordPress had some sort of support for that, so a way they could register with each plugin saying, I'm using this, this, and this. Please update the CSP so I can be allowed to run. And that would be super powerful if the framework gave you something to work with that would help make your site more secure. That'd be really useful.
Yeah, it's really useful for a developer. Very good point. And when you find these type of these type of bugs? Because I mean, like, the fact that you are using regex to find them, they're not simple to be identified, but once you see what's happening, technically it's a very simple bug. It's a very simple issue. Is there something that surprises you when you see these type of simple technical issues? And maybe...
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks simple because I'm trying to explain it in a simple way, but the first one of these I found, it does take quite a while to do that initial bit of research, and it always messes with my head, like which single double quote pair do I need to put in where to actually get it to be able to exploitable. So generally I found that it's very, very difficult to write certain regex expressions. And I submitted one of these bugs to a plugin developer, and they reached out to me asking if I'd do a code review of their plugin. So I went through and started looking for, I did a little bit of preliminary work, and I managed to find a pattern inside his plugin that was common in several other plugins. So I ended up actually getting quite a large bounty because I submitted that. So I got around $5,000 for finding that across several plugins. And as a result, I gave this guy a discount so that because I wouldn't have found it without looking at his plugin, and then reviewed the rest of his plugin and helped him secure it. And so it was like I tried really hard to fix those regex expressions, and I found for some cases it just wasn't possible to do it. Like you have to switch to something with contextual awareness. So we ended up writing something that could do that parsing of the HTML in a secure way to do what he was trying to do with his plugin. So that was really good.
Interesting. Yeah, what I meant, by the way, by simple, as you said, I mean, I'm not saying it's simple to discover, because to get to the point where you identify it and get to know about that vulnerability class, it requires years of knowledge, of course. But what I mean is, like, once you see it, that, like, technically, it's like it's very simple to do it, you know. So like at this stage, because even in the beginning you said becoming a bug bounty hunter in the early months, it took you like a month first to get the find vulnerability. But once you have all this knowledge as a bug bounty hunter, is it more, you will be finding more vulnerabilities quicker because you have the technical skills, of course, but it's more now about pattern recognition, pattern of certain type of mistakes and certain type of code, etc.
Yeah, and I really just enjoy like sitting down and looking at code and reviewing it and seeing the different ways people can write stuff. And so that's one of my favorite ways of finding a vulnerability is because I've got all this WordPress code downloaded, and I know a lot of the other bug bounty hunters do the same. So they download all of the plugins, they keep them updated, and you can just start writing regex to look for things. And if you can write a regex that can be quite a loose match for the thing you're looking at, so I tend to try and I write regex to match these regular expressions that people are using in a way that might be vulnerable. And that will give me a big list of leads that I can go through, and I can look at the code for each of these and quite quickly work out if something kind of feels vulnerable to me, just because of how many times I've seen it before. Can be like, yep, this looks vulnerable. It's executing in the right place, like after the sanitization. There's quite a few where it isn't vulnerable because it runs before the WordPress sanitization, which is a good way to do it because then you're relying on WordPress to do this sanitization for you. But yeah, once you've built up that level of knowledge and you've got the tools and the skills, it's quite easy to keep pumping out these vulnerabilities. So I think I've got just over 600 WordPress vulnerabilities now.
Wow, that's a big number. And going back almost full circle, because you said like you like looking at people's code, doing the research and testing. And you said earlier, like because of AI, people are not even installing the plugins. It feels like almost AI is killing. I mean, it's a good tool, as you said, of course, but it's also killing the fun in it. As I was at CloudFest, there was the capture the flag and the team that won, they found all the flags. They captured all the flags within 18 minutes, and actually I mean, they're good technical people, but they didn't spend time finding the flags. They just spent most of their time was tuning, building the AI, etc. So it can find the vulnerabilities automatically. So, and on the way back, I was talking to someone. It was the same because was telling me about this project that he set up, and I installed this, and got this up and running within just half an hour. And it feels like, which is great because you are more productive, but AI is killing the fun of trying a new OS, of installing a new distribution, of trying to break something, because it's doing everything for you. Isn't it a bit like that? It's a bit ironic kind of thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of success, like augmenting my approaches with AI. And I mean, I do know some bug bounty hunters where they've started going off bug bounty hunting because they've automated it. They've given that fun away to a robot to find the things instead. I think what we'll see a lot of is like the kind of the easier, the low hanging fruit will kind of go away because robots will be able to find that very quickly. Whereas the more creative stuff, we're probably going to see a lot of that still, especially as a lot more of the code becomes AI developed. You're going to see more complicated bugs coming about from stuff that the AI can't really grasp. Like if you're going between several files and classes, it might not understand certain boundaries and logic, whereas you would be able to understand that after building up that knowledge of a particular application once you get intimate enough with it.
Yeah, hopefully. Let's see where we'll be in 5 years, because it seems nowadays 5 years is a very long time, no?
Oh yeah, it's going to massively change, and like we don't know where it's going to go, but it'll be a fun ride.
Good. Thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your demo. It was very, very insightful. Before we end this episode, can you please tell everyone where they can find you, get in touch, or learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I've got a blog, sec.stealthcopter.com. You can find me on there. I have links to my WordPress hacking resources. A lot of my reports and proof of concepts are public. I've got them on my GitHub. I've got a little capture the flag website, wpctf.org, that I created. That's got some challenges that are still live on there. There's one modern WordPress instance you can try taking over, but there's also a fun challenge for anyone more familiar with WordPress that has the original WordPress 1.0. So I think it's like 20 years old. It took me a while to get it working, but you can go and have a play writing vulnerabilities for that code base, because back then there wasn't as much, like there was no money for finding the bugs in WordPress. So there's a lot of really weird, terrible, bad bugs in that you can find. So that would be a lot of fun for anyone interested in it.
Thanks a lot, Matt. We'll add a link to your websites and whatever you mentioned in our show notes as well. Thank you again. Thanks everyone for following, and we will see you at the next one. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.